अक़वाम मुत्तहिदा के सेक्रेटरी जनरल अंतोनियो गतेरेस लोगों के सवालों का जवाब दे रहे हैं।
System so that it can recharge the aquifer and then the system starts coming back. So we are working on that. It's at the project is submitted to the GCF for its feasibility, and as I said, the Chinese government is also helping us in that because they did it in China. In the Three Gorges Dam, they created two bigger wetland lakes south of that dam to recharge the aquifer. And I think this is something that we need to do in Pakistan.
Thank you. Again, the lady with her hand up.
Hello, hi. My name is Anam Rathore, and I'm an environment and climate change activist. So I'm going to continue on slightly on the previous question. So there's a growing regional tension between India and Pakistan, and there's there can be possible escalation. And a lot of water in Pakistan comes through from India. So the water crisis is Pakistan is growing. Given that we are a riparian country, a lot of the people's livelihood depend on agriculture. So how can the UN play a role in conflict resolution?
Well, there was an agreement between India and Pakistan, and there is a system in which the World Bank, the World Bank is involved. And obviously, what I would ask the two countries is to have a clear cooperation in relation to water. And I have some moral authority. I was Prime Minister of Portugal when we established an agreement with Spain. It is probably one of the landmark agreements of common water management of two countries. Our rivers come from Spain. And it was possible to have an agreement between the two countries on the common management of our rivers. And I think this example shows that with effective cooperation and dialogue, all these problems can and must be solved. Because if one country thinks that solving the problem and letting the others in a bad situation, it's a good thing, it is not. Because in the end, then things turn against everybody. So it is clear that water must be an instrument of peace and not an instrument of conflict.
Thank you.
Yes, I think the Excellency pointed out in his speech also that water is the critical issue to climate change. And with Pakistan and India, the problem is that we have this treaty called the Indus Water Treaty. It was negotiated in the 1960s. There are two main aspects which are missing in that. The first and the most important one is climate variance. Now, under the Indus Water Treaty, the water that comes in, there are two main sources, monsoons and the glaciers. And both are affected by climate change now. But we have not discussed this climate variance. It needs to be discussed. And the other aspect is the aquifer that I talked about. This is an aquifer we share with India. It is not a part of the treaty. So, because the drawdown is so large, it started getting affected. So I think there needs to be a dialogue on this, but, at the moment, there's no chance with what is happening right now.
Next question. Okay, for the gender balance, the gentleman with a red tie. Mike, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Zahid Latif Khan, and I represent the capital market of Pakistan. It was quite heartening to listen to your speech, Excellency Antonio, that you mentioned that although Pakistan is getting affected from the environmental hazards, but it's not contributing towards the environment world over. So actually we have seen that internationally there are a few countries which have got the carbon exchange, carbon credit exchange. So I was just wondering that because of the lack of resources in Pakistan, how United Nations can help in establishing this sort of a thing so that people become more responsible in using the carbon emission. So this is my question. Thank you.
One of the things that my new special envoy, that starts with March, Mark Carney, has been trying to mobilize in his function today as governor of a central bank, is to mobilize all central banks in the world to establish new rules for the financial sector to be able to disclose the climate-related risks of financial operations. Today we have a disclosure of risks for reasons that are essentially economic. It's necessary to translate the reality of climate into the financial risks. On the other hand, we have been working hard. I created a coalition of CEOs of especially asset management funds, We are working hard with pension funds and with others, and I believe there are many of these funds in Pakistan, in order to make sure that their portfolios shift. The portfolios of the funds that are working with us are still, at the present moment, are still compatible, according to the companies that they represent, to an increase of temperature at the end of the century to 3 to 4 degrees, of 3 to 4 degrees, which means that it is in the interests of us all that asset managers make a shift, progressive shift to the green economy in their portfolios. And I would say that, if I may be a little bit brutal, there is a good reason for that. It is clear that assets related to the brown economy, namely some aspects of fossil fuels, in the future, their value will inevitably decrease. And so it makes sense from the point of view, for instance, of a pension fund to protect the pension money of the people involved, to get rid of those assets that will tend to decrease in its value, and to bet in the assets that will increase its value, as it is the case of those related to the green economy. I have made personally a small investment in a fund, a green fund, and I have to say that that green fund is growing much more quickly than all the other small investments that I made, which means that the green economy is now the good economy, and it means that the financial sector is becoming, very interestingly, a driver pushing governments to change regulations, pushing governments, because some of these things require government regulations, pushing governments to assume more clearly responsibilities in this regard. So I'm very hopeful that the financial sector will become more and more an ally in climate action, based not on, in some cases based on, I would say, even a generous approach, because more and more companies and banks and institutions feel that their staff is concerned about climate action, that the children of those CEOs are concerned about these things. So there is a shift that is authentic. But then there is enlightened self-interest. Why to bet in things that have no future? No. The logic of business is to invest in the economy that has a future. And the economy that has a future is a green economy, not a brown economy.
Thank you. Next question, the gentleman in the paisley tie. Oh, sorry, striped tie.
Thank you. Your Excellency, welcome to Islamabad and Pakistan. It's wonderful to have you here with us. Paris Agreement gave us a lot of hope.
Mike, Mike.
Is it working now?
Yeah, yeah.
So there was a lot of hope with the Paris Agreement, but for a lot of us in Pakistan and across the world, that hope is quickly turning to fear and tragedy. Given what's happening with the climate talks, we've seen disappointment after disappointment. How long do you think we can continue to base our collective hopes on climate negotiations that are led by some countries who've got different means of going about the negotiations? I guess my question to you is, climate is being disrupted. Is there a disruption needed within the climate talks, within the climate negotiations process to move things forward? Thank you.
Well, it is true, if one looks at Madrid, that today governments are to a certain extent lagging behind what is happening in societies. But it is also true that the pressure is mounting, and is mounting for a number of reasons. First, there are economic reasons. The green economy is becoming the most profitable one. My country, Portugal, has launched recently a bid for solar energy, for a number of plants of solar energy. And they got in the proposals for that bid the cheapest price ever for electricity anywhere from whatever source. No, So it is clear, and much cheaper than coal and much cheaper than natural gas. That my country is closing the coal plants, one in 2021, the other in 2023. Natural gas will still remain part as a kind of a, system of equilibrium of the network, but the bet has been in the renewables. And they got now prices that are astounding. I think, if I remember well, $14 per megawatt hour. But these I'm not so sure, it's just by memory. Which means that, to invest in fossil fuel production of energy is a mistake for the future. It is to have more expensive electricity in the future, which doesn't make any sense. On the other hand, we see that in all other areas, the green economy is becoming the most attractive. So there is a pressure I mentioned from the financial sectors. On the other hand, in Europe, 2 years ago, and I speak for Europe because it's my area, 2 years ago, all the elections, the key factor was migration. Last year, the key factor was climate. So public opinions are starting to put a lot of pressure on governments in relation to climate. And it's very interesting that because of that, the European governments have now committed, with the exception of Poland, but I hope that this problem will also be solved. And I am quite convinced that we will witness in the next 1, 2, 3 years a much stronger commitment of governments to move forward. And I hope that it will be possible to translate it already in Glasgow. The key is the big emitters. And it's absolutely, more than 70 countries have committed already to carbon neutrality. But they represent only 15% of the emissions. The big emitters need to commit to the same objective. And we need now to do everything possible to make sure that the big emitters also assume that responsibility. And I think that there is also a growing conscience that in their countries that is needed. So we are not yet there. We are still losing the battle. But I think that the conditions are starting to be created for us to win the war.
Thank you. Next question. The lady in the blue. Sorry, I'm going to go back to the women now.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Saida Hadika Jamshed and I'm working on carbon market project in Pakistan.
On?
Carbon markets in Pakistan. And I have a question for Honorable Secretary General. The developed countries are failing to keep their climate finance pledge of 100 billion each year. And without it, developing countries will not be able to cope up with the climate change impacts. So how exactly is the international community planning to ensure that this promise is fulfilled?
Now, the question is to make sure that the commitments that were made, in particular the commitments to adaptation, are met. And this is what, as I said, we still need the clarification, and I hope that in Glasgow that clarification will be real. We are seeing also the mobilization of resources beyond that. We are seeing all the international financial institutions investing more and more money in these. We are seeing a big success. We are seeing also the mobilization of resources beyond that. We are seeing all the international financial institutions investing more and more money in these. We are seeing a big success, for instance, in green bonds everywhere. So I think there are reasons for hope beyond that. But one thing is clear, there were commitments made in Paris, namely by the developed countries. Those commitments need to be met in a transparent way.
Would you like to add? Okay, next question, the gentleman in the yellow tie. Yes.
Excellency, thank you very much. On behalf of the business community of Pakistan, I want to thank you for the sentiments expressed for the people of Pakistan. We love you too, sir. And sir, to achieve sustainable development, peace and security is a must. Peace and security is a must to achieve SDGs. Now, what is happening in Kashmir, it is affecting our economy, our business, and 220 million people, they have been waiting to listen to you, and those in Kashmir are expecting that you would play a role to ease their lives. It's 197 days that they are under oppression. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, I've always been strongly advocating the need for an enhanced dialogue between India and Pakistan, and even offered my good offices more than once. Of course, good offices can only be implemented if they are accepted by both parties. And we have been expressing very clearly the absolute need for human rights to be fully respected in Kashmir. By the way, if there has been any solid contribution for that, are the two reports that were presented